What is going on, everybody? It's Conley here with the Science Knights. They are assembled. Dr. Anirban Bhattacharjee is still overseas, but for good reason. He's working real hard over there on research. But you know what? We have Dr. Thomas Shiller and Dr. Sean Graham here. Going to be talking a little about what are we going to be talking about today, Tom?
Once again, we're going to be talking about coronavirus, but we're not going to be talking specifically about COVID-19. As we've done in our past couple of shows. We're going to be talking about this group of viruses that all fall within the coronavirus name. And this is going to be another episode where I kind of shut up and ask some questions because Dr. Graham has done the research and is going to talk a little bit about it. And towards the end of the show, we might talk about some of the work that Dr. Graham has done for your PhD, right?
Yeah. I'm certainly not a virologist. But the research I did for my PhD involved the transmission cycle of a virus. But I studied the amphibians and reptiles that might have been, hosts for that virus. So that was,
cool.
I didn't really work with viruses that much, although I did. I worked in a biosafety level 3 facility, which is just one step down from a biosafety level 4 facility, which is the nastiest one you can get in. And
What'd you have to wear?
I wore a spacesuit. Yeah,
like a hazmat?
The protection
Really?
I was wearing is like you see in the movies.
Huh.
Yeah, it's not quite as crazy because at biosafety level 4, you wear a pressurized, positive pressure suit that's got a hose sticking out of it, so it's got its own, air supply, and it wasn't that crazy. But if you saw what I was wearing, you'd run away from me. You'd be like, "What is that?"
2001 Space Odyssey type suit.
You'd be like, "That guy might have something all over him I don't want," because it has like a face mask and all the it just.
Can you get those at the hardware store?
You can probably get most of what you need there. Like, it's not like a thick rubber suit, because it was just like ordinary kind of pants and stuff that you could probably get from like a hospital supply company. But the whole enchilada was like, duct tape all over the arms and where your booties were, and so there was. The idea was that you'd have total protection, and then all kinds of bleaching agents went on over all the seams, and then it was locked. We were locked in this room. It was full on. It was crazy, and we were
How many hours a day would you work in that?
It wasn't very long. The experiment we did, went for a couple of days, and we were in there for a few hours at a time. And we were purposefully infecting snakes and lizards with this virus. That it's not that I don't really consider this virus very bad. I guess we're jumping right into this topic, so we might as well keep talking about it. But the virus that we were studying was called Eastern Equine Encephalitis virus, or Triple E.
Yeah,
and it's like you can kind of think of it as a native U.S. West Nile virus. Same transmission cycle, similar symptoms, similar fatality rate. If you get infected, it can cause encephalitis, which can cause pretty bad disease, fatality. And if you get encephalitis from this virus and recover, you're generally a vegetable afterwards. So if you do get encephalitis from it, it's not a very great thing if you survive, honestly.
And what were your findings? Was it affecting?
Yeah, we did kind of a simple experiment where we tested the lizards and snakes to see if the temperature we held them in would change the virus, the number of virus in their blood, what we call viremia. And it did. It was a simple experiment. We infected them. We infected 3 treatment groups, and we kept each of those groups at separate temperatures, kind of a realistic temperature that those reptiles would experience in nature, and that kind of a high temperature and a kind of a low temperature. And the low temperature caused, the virus didn't replicate very well. At the high temperature, the virus was really high in the blood, but then the reptile's immune system was able to get it under control quickly. Actually, the graph looks just like this dampen the curve thing we're seeing everywhere, right? Flatten the curve. So the hot temperature was like the high peak, and the cooler temperature was like the low hill. So the immune system kind of worked the same way with the temperature of, depending on the temperature you kept the lizard in.
Well, here's a question related to COVID-19. I know we're not focusing on that for this episode, but since it's in the news, how is it affecting animals? Is it being transmitted to other animals other than humans? I know we talked about bats and pangolins and stuff
Yeah.
like that in previous episode, but what about other animals?
We have no idea, but I did hear one of the really cool podcasts I've been listening to get leads on what to research and listening to
this week in virology.
Yeah, This Week in Virology. These are hardcore real virologists, and they've been getting like experts in coronaviruses and to talk. And so I listened to one. You guys should listen if you like it. You might, it's great stuff. But the guy said, now that this virus, the coronavirus, COVID 2019, is on the loose in humans, the potential for it to spill back into animal populations where it's never been is a possibility. So it could
where it's never been?
Yeah, because it's
If
probably
it's been in the pendulum and
it's been in these, probably in a bat in China, right? That's where it's native to. That's where it's been hanging out, and but now it's in North America, and there's plenty of bats here, and there's plenty of other stuff that it could potentially jump to. And they were talking about, this is kind of alarming, that they're talking about how this can now get established in mammal populations everywhere because humans are everywhere. So this thing could jump to coatimundis in South America. It could jump to pronghorn. I mean, this is total speculation, but it's the possibility has never been there before, and it is a brand new virus, right? Because it underwent a series of mutations to get to us first, and it's likely that a series of mutations would be necessary for it to jump to a new host here in North America. But that is a possibility because it already proved that it could jump to us.
Do they still do live animal testing with this sort of thing?
That they're currently, there's, it's about research money and dollars, but yeah, China has been doing surveillance for other coronaviruses. This is how we have this information on where it could have possibly came from, right? When we talk about, what's the closest relative to this coronavirus, we have data for that. We have data from wild populations, and the genome of a close relative of this one is available to compare, because somebody has been going out into the field in China and grabbing bats and getting blood and then seeing what kind of coronaviruses they have. And all that research has mostly been kind of spurred by the two previous coronavirus outbreaks that probably people are familiar with but might not know are coronaviruses. That's SARS-1. They're calling it SARS-1 now because they're calling coronavirus COVID-19 SARS-2. And MERS, Middle East, respiratory syndrome. And that's another coronavirus, also from a bat.
Do you think China's holding back a lot of research and information?
Like all of what I've been talking about, how what they're related to, is from data that Chinese researchers have been publishing.
Oh, okay.
And since MERS is mostly focused, most of the patients have been in the Middle East. Although it also, I guess, jumped from people traveling. It ended up in South Korea as well. There have been Middle Eastern researchers working on this. I read a review paper by Iranian scientists who study MERS because it's there. So that's the way science works. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about China and it not being upfront and maybe hiding stuff and that kind of thing. But we wouldn't know anything if the Chinese haven't been publishing information.
Scientific
We would
articles.
all the stuff we talked about, that 80% of the cases are mild, that some of them are asymptomatic, that the elderly are most at risk, the comorbidity factors. All that comes from Chinese data, from the first 80,000 cases which were in China. We'd be totally in the dark. And we don't know everything, but at least we know that.
Well, we're having trouble keeping up with that here in the States because we're still kind of limited or restricting the tests. Right?
Yeah, we don't have enough tests. That's the reason why it's restricted, is because we don't have enough. So what they're doing makes sense. Like you might have heard out there that not enough people are getting tested or people are getting turned away from being tested. It's because we just don't have enough tests. And that's on us. But it's not like, they're mostly focusing on people who look like they have really bad symptoms to double check. And I guess you are hearing about politicians getting tested, things like that. First member of Congress was diagnosed with it today, an hour before
really?
I walked in here.
Really?
Yeah, this stuff's happening so fast. Literally, I can't remember the guy's name from Florida. A Republican from Florida just came out and said positive for COVID-19. So he got tested somehow. So I think that there's probably a little bit of both going on. The hospitals are testing people with heavy duty symptoms, and then people who have a lot of money and are real worried like members of Congress,
Right.
professional basketball players, they're getting tested somehow too.
Yeah, I don't think I clicked on the article, and I might be remembering this wrong, but I think I saw something pop up saying that Bill Gates was planning on donating a bunch of money for
I wouldn't doubt it.
test kits.
He does a lot of there's a lot of the really cool philanthropy that Bill Gates does. He spends a lot of time trying to focus on emerging infectious diseases and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the goal was to like send a test kit to everyone's home or something.
Wow,
Yeah.
that would take a while.
Lofty goals.
yeah.
But
They are talking about drive-through testing
Yeah,
facilities.
it's already started.
Yeah, here in Texas, I believe.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything about it in Texas, but I've seen videos of big lines trying to get into the drive-through.
maybe McDonald's will get on board with
Well,
that.
what they-
a
what-
quarter
Big
pounder with
Mac
a side of coronavirus test.
What Trump said in his press conference is he was going to set up drive-through testing centers at Walmart parking lots.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good place.
It's actually
Walmart?
that's a pretty great idea.
What's a Walmart?
I don't know. I've never heard of it. It's a terrible corporation that doesn't sponsor us, I think.
I know. I guess so.
So if you're listening, Walmart, I'm sure their CEO is listening right now.
But I guess before this turns into coronavirus 3,
Yeah.
we should shift focus. We're gonna try to give you guys some background information because I didn't bring my timeline. Maybe we'll do another show like that at some point. But we're talking about the other coronaviruses, and we mentioned a few that are really nasty. SARS, the original, right?
OG.
The OG of the coronavirus, the one that popped out of nowhere and said, "Hey, everybody, you guys better pay attention to us a little bit more," because this one was scary. 2003, an outbreak in China, and mostly focused on hospitals, and it did go global, but it was stopped in its tracks by a couple of things.
So wait, SARS, an epidemic?
I would say that it could have been a pandemic, but I would say it's an epidemic that kind of had spilled over because people traveled.
Right.
But no, it didn't. It never got to the point where this current SARS-2 coronavirus COVID-19 is it's an epidemic that started in China and then you had transmission happening in other countries. Mm-hmm. SARS never did that really. It never got out of the hospitals in other countries. And part of it was its own kind of intrinsic, properties. And then the other part was that the World Health Organization in China went nuts and really got it under control. And we really dodged a bullet. The more I read about SARS, I remember in the years after SARS, there was kind of a lot of callous kind of joking about SARS. Like, the media went crazy about SARS and it was no big deal. And man, the more I read about this, the more I think we really dodged a bullet because it had a significantly higher mortality rate than our current COVID-19. It was about 10%, which
That's high.
that's really high. Now we'll never really know whether or not that could have been higher in other populations within. That's because it basically burned itself out. It would cause symptoms way sooner than COVID-19 does. And that's, in a way, that's the sneaky way that COVID-19 actually might end up being, it will end up being way worse than SARS in terms of total infections and in terms of total fatalities because SARS is gone. It's got no ability to kill anybody else. It did what it was going to do, right? It's all over. But because you would basically get symptoms within like 3 days of getting infected, and then you would just go down for the count. You'd be hospitalized. Wow. So there's no opportunity to travel, no opportunity to shake anybody's hand, no opportunity to drink, somebody else, have a sip of somebody else's beer, nothing like that, right? COVID-19 is so different, right? It takes 2 weeks for some people to get symptoms, and other people are walking around with no symptoms, don't even know they've got the virus, right?
But they're carrying it.
But they're carrying it everywhere, and it's going everywhere, right? So
they're calling it the Houdini virus.
Yeah. It does seem to have some interesting tricks, but SARS was kind of more brutal, more brilliant, like a big burning fire. And as soon as they were able to clamp down on a couple of the transmission chains and then stifle it out. So they figured out that it was open markets of kind of like in the situation that most people are under the impression that COVID-19, that it came from food markets. They did identify that most people had gone to a single food market, so they shut that place down. And then jumping ahead, they eventually realized that it was a couple of mammals that were being sold at that market that were the host. And they weren't bats, they were raccoon dogs and civets, which...
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Raccoon dogs?
A raccoon dog, which is...
Little dumpster divers?
It's called that because it looks like a cross between a raccoon and a dog.
But you're not going to find it at PetSmart.
No. Both of them, I think, belong to the big family of like a weasel-like family of mammals. Civets look almost like a cross between a cat and a leopard. They're spotted, they're elongated, but they're not really cats either. So
Do they have a ring tail?
They do, yeah, and both of them look, vaguely reminiscent of a raccoon because I think the civets also have like a little black mask across their eyes.
I could never identify a raccoon ever because of that mask.
Yeah,
Couldn't do it.
Yeah,
They're sneaky.
They're all totally.
They're anonymous. You don't know what they are. Which one are you?
Which one?
Are you Bart or James? Which raccoon are you?
I'm Bob.
Yeah, so these things were being sold. They didn't know all this at the time in 2003. They figured out all later that when they sequenced the virus and compared it to and the similarity between the virus that was in those mammals at the food market and this virus SARS was like 99%.
Oh,
so it's definitely it. With the closest we've come with COVID-19 is 96.
Right.
And so it's in a bat. So it's probably a bat, but it's still a mystery exactly which population of bats. We may never know. But anyway, and the other thing, since it hospitalized people so quickly, there was a ton of transmission in hospitals. And when they realized that like nurses and doctors were getting infected by this, they started really doubling their efforts to keep the hospital staff separated from the patients to where they couldn't get infected, putting on extra gear. And they were able to kind of isolate the patients, the clusters of patients that were popping up very fast. And then they were able to keep it under control. And SARS went extinct. It's gone.
And it was contained in China.
It was contained in China and the couple of places where it spilled over.
Right.
Same thing. China was kind of figuring out that, holy crap, if you go anywhere near one of these patients with normal protective gear, you're going to get infected. So everybody from now on does this. And then, of course, they're telling everybody about this. The world media, the World Health Organization, which is another fortunate thing that we have that's incredible. They were telling, any of the hospitals where they had people fly out of China, here's how you do it. You got to protect them. People were freaking out. The media was freaking out. Everybody got the message. And they shut it down, and SARS went extinct.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of people ask who remember when SARS happened, why we didn't have the same reaction back then here in the States that we are with COVID-19. And that's probably a big part of it is that it was contained. Yeah,
it was contained fast,
Well,
but also I remember a couple of these outbreaks, and I definitely remember when SARS was like really hitting. It was all over the news. The news ate it up.
You would see everybody in China with a mask on and gloves, and they were. But now you see people out there. I went to Porter's today, and there's a guy with a mask and gloves, and like he was just.
They didn't hear our show.
They didn't hear our show. No.
They couldn't hear you.
They couldn't hear you. They couldn't hear you. Yeah. So SARS was a big media circus. And it did blink out very fast. And of course, there was afterwards this kind of callous attitude of like, oh, the media overreacted.
Right.
They did it. I remember this very specifically. I forget, wasn't that a South Park? Was there a South Park episode where they were kind of treating it as the disease flavor of the week media circus? And I really, like SARS, if it had maybe a couple more days incubation period, right, where a few more people got out of China,
like COVID,
right? Maybe a week. Man, it could have gone pandemic. But World Health Organization, China, and doctors got it under control. And then 10 years later, one I didn't hear about, and I think I know why, is MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. So SARS is severe acute respiratory syndrome, and both of those viruses are named after diseases. I mean, it's the diseases they cause. And we'll get to MERS after a quick break.
All right, we're back. We're the Science Knights, and today we're talking about coronaviruses, not specifically COVID-19, which is the what's being covered in the news everywhere.
Yeah.
We're talking about the group of viruses that comprise COVID-19, but also SARS, which we just talked about in our previous segment. And now we're going to talk a little bit about MERS. So, what do you have to say about MERS?
MERS, I don't know as much about MERS because I lived through MERS. Everybody did, except for a few.
Haven't never heard of it.
I didn't remember hearing about this when it hit in 2012.
Oh, 2012.
Yeah, so it was pretty recent.
The end of the world.
Yeah, and it should have been a big deal, right? Because everybody was talking about the Mayan calendar
Right,
and the end of the world.
yeah,
there was a movie called was there
2012?
Yeah,
what was that
disaster
called?
movie.
That John Cusack movie.
Yeah.
Cusack, yeah.
That's terrible.
So MERS
It was
hits,
awful.
and I don't think it became huge news because this is another one of those things. There's something about this virus that was very specific. That this is like a really nasty virus. Worse than SARS, worse than COVID-19 in terms of mortality. Some of the early papers suggested a 40% mortality rate,
Whoa.
which is up there near the lower end of Ebola. It's crazy. And so people should have freaked out. But this one, so all these coronaviruses is going to have their own unique personalities, right? So this one was not very transmissible. I don't even think that so basically they would get kind of direct transmission from whatever animal reservoir somehow.
Okay.
And then they might infect a couple of their family members and maybe some of the people at the hospital. And it wouldn't go anywhere beyond that. So it's not very infective, right? We talk about...
Where did it originate?
So the first cases were, I think, in Saudi Arabia or Jordan or something like that.
Oh, Jordan.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So when they did surveillance, they actually found that camels can have a related coronavirus. So the first suspicion was that somehow this was coming from camels. It's now been figured out, I think, that bats are the original host. Again,
bats.
yeah. And
Those
that somehow
vampires.
camels might be, helping, this bat virus jump to humans somehow. I don't know if it's very clear exactly how this jumps, but it seems like every time this one's still around, by the way. SARS is extinct. It did this little mutation and jumped to humans once and then burned out, and we've never seen it again. It's possible that that exact same transmission chain could develop again if we were to eat and have civets and raccoon dogs in our menu again. But I think China has seriously clamped down on anything
What
to
are
do
they
with
thinking?
those.
Raccoon dogs on
Yeah,
the menu?
I don't think I'm going to be eating a raccoon dog anytime soon.
People eat raccoon here.
It's not an appetizer.
I heard that raccoon is good. but-
People eat raccoon in the
Raccoon
United
dog.
States. People eat possum. People eat armadillo. So watch out.
kidding.
Yes, of course they do.
Armadillos?
Yeah, have you ever met a Cajun person?
No.
Okay.
This is kind of getting off track here, but for those of you who used to watch Wild Kingdom and all these old
Marvin
documentaries,
Perkins. Yeah.
Armadillos? People eat armadillos?
Yes.
they do.
And they get leprosy from handling
Yeah,
armadillos.
they can transmit.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, well, I've heard that.
Yeah, one of the most recent cases of leprosy in the U.S. was from a Cajun.
Don't eat armadillos, Cajuns.
They're supposed to be pretty
so
tasty.
Wild Kingdom?
I know
It was
Dr.
one
John
of these
said-
documentaries on PBS, that came on at 10 o'clock at night. But I remember watching this as a kid, and it was a Jacques Cousteau documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the end of this documentary, Cousteau sits down with his whole family for this big feast in their home, and they're all sitting on this decked out long table with candles and silverware and china, and they bring in a silver platter with a cover over it, place it in the middle of the table, pull off the cover, and there is just a roasted armadillo on its back.
Oh,
With its legs and
Just
everything?
Just legs,
its head?
just
it's a little
Legs
armor
sticking
shell.
up.
And
yeah, and they just dug right in and were pulling off legs like it was a chicken. But apparently it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And if the Cajuns are eating it, then you know that it's
That it's
Ele-
got,
it'll make you
edible.
mentally
you know that
ill.
it's got cayenne pepper on it.
Yeah.
That's about all you can
It's
say.
got some Tonys.
we apologize
Got
to
Tony's.
the Cajuns who are
So
listening.
this
out
is this kind of goes back to the first coronavirus episode where I debunked the idea that this came from people eating bats in China.
Yeah.
And this is everywhere. It's still everywhere. And that little urban legend got serious legs. John Cornyn today, Republican senator from here in Texas,
Right.
went on record saying, so there's this big debate about whether we should call it Chinese virus.
It's a little racist.
A little bit, yeah. And so it's Trump, of course, who's suggesting there's no problem with this. But Cornyn backs him up and says, yeah, because these Chinese, they eat dogs, they eat bats and snakes. So he's bought all of that stuff, and now it's on the top of our food chain. Look, a Chinese documentary company, right, could go anywhere in Louisiana right now. And probably show some pretty heinous images of people chopping up snapping turtles, right? And eating, oh yeah, snapping turtles, they are delicious. So bushmeat is not peculiar to China. In fact, a more alarming place where bushmeat is consumed is in Africa, right? This is possibly how Ebola keeps popping up from the bushmeat trade. And we eat bushmeat here in the United States too. It's going away now, but we certainly used to do it a lot more than we do now. And it is a problem, but it is not something we can point fingers at because we do the same thing here.
I want to be vegan now, like after this conversation, frankly.
The snapping
Do we know any
turtles?
viruses that can be transmitted?
I love
through...
snapping turtles.
Was it the snapping turtles that put you over the top?
Is there an avocado virus?
Yeah.
Can I just like have a diet of
I don't think
avocados?
so.
I have an avocado allergy, so it would be like a virus.
Oh no.
Yeah, they're terrible anyway. So
So
I love 'em.
so MERS emerges. Every time you hear about an outbreak emerge, it's a new transmission from the reservoir. It pops up but it doesn't go very far because it has not developed those mutations it needs to transmit within humans very easily. So this is a good example of what we've been talking about, that COVID-19 kind of won this evolutionary lottery where it punched a couple lottery tickets. It got the mutation that allows it to jump from a bat to a person. And that's the first one. You need that. And then the second one is to be able to transmit effectively from person to person. And it got them both. And it got them both this year or in 2019.
So
right?
this is SARS evolved.
So the SARS
Can we say that?
Well, it's not the original SARS that evolved. It's totally different. It's related to SARS, but it's not from the same ancestor, right? It came from a different coronavirus from a different population of mammals. It didn't come from those raccoon dogs and civets. That was a totally different coronavirus that punched its own lottery ticket in 2002, right? Got the same two mutations and then was off to the races, but it worked a little differently. It had its own personality. Totally separate evolutionary event.
Yeah.
Right? And MERS, same thing. Every time it's jumping, it looks like it's getting a mutation that's allowing it, or it's close enough to humans somehow to maybe, it's close enough, it's in mammals that it's not that hard for it to jump to humans, but it hasn't gotten a new, mutation to allow it to transmit from human to human very effectively. Right?
So did SARS and MERS have the same effect? The COVID-19
same symptoms.
Same symptoms.
Yeah. Severe
Oh,
upper respiratory
same.
kind of stuff. Yeah. Pneumonia, all that. Yeah. Very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like when these viruses get into the lungs, they party down and they wreak havoc. In fact, it's not really that it looks like they don't really wreak havoc. It's your lungs, the immune response in your lungs is really what makes the disease really severe.
So do we know yet why? Sorry
overreaction.
to interrupt.
No, it's
do we
good.
know yet why COVID-19 in some cases does not manifest at all?
Definitely not.
No?
Yeah, this is like, from what I've been listening to, this is the kind of stuff that is the most difficult thing to understand for epidemiologists, for virologists, is exactly how, disease occurs. Transmission and, all the kind of pathogenic effects of the virus. That stuff is still kind of super vague. Why certain patients don't do well, why children are not affected. All of these things are mysteries, and it take years of research to figure out.
It's kind of scary too.
Yeah.
And these viruses, they have the ability to evolve at such a rapid rate that could change too if it's allowed to.
I'm pretty worried about that. The idea that it could spill back into wildlife populations or domestic animal populations is pretty scary, because that means it'll probably stay around forever. Right, it's gonna.
You can't line up a bunch of bunch of Audad and
we're a few years, maybe a year away from having a vaccine.
Yeah.
There was one person that tested the vaccine, like a prototype.
Yeah,
of the vaccine today.
they started testing. They started the first phase of vaccine trials in Washington.
Yeah.
Either today or yesterday, I forget on my timeline. But then, it takes time because you don't just go, oh, it works.
Here, let's mass distribute.
Yeah, they follow these vaccines over weeks to see what the response is, see what works, see which doses work.
And the virus is changing while that's taking place, right?
Yeah.
Or it could be changing.
I don't want to scare people, but one of the things that does alarm me is if this virus gets another mutation that changes it in a bad way. And I don't even want to speculate on what kinds of bad ways it could change.
Yeah, but you're talking about a 50-50 shot. It can mutate into something that could be worse, or it could mutate into something that would kill itself.
Yeah.
Right?
And you're right. There is a tendency, it's no guarantee, but there's a tendency for, it doesn't really do this virus any good to kill its hosts, right?
Right.
Especially if it doesn't get off the host and head to a new host before the host dies. Because all those viruses will die with the host. So there is a tendency for decreased virulence over time, or and that kind of thing. But there's also, viruses don't. This isn't a strategy that the viruses are thinking about. They don't.
Right.
They don't have.
Well,
They're not even really. I mean, there's argument about whether or not these things are even alive. They're just the only strategy they have is evolution. But evolution, those mutations, that's chance, right? That's chance. So you don't know. Right, what exactly is going to happen, and it doesn't know it's going to kill its host. It doesn't know.
And it's not happening on a 1,000,000-year time scale like we normally see. It's happening.
Yeah, it's happening.
Half a millisecond.
Yeah, a million things happen this week.
Replicating.
Yeah, it does scare me. Like a mutation, for example, that increased the fatality rate. That would be.
Or if you simply had a mutation that allowed it to affect children. If the current version is only affecting elderly or sick people, you're hearing it now. People are saying, "Well, I'm not old. I'm not sick."
But how long is it gonna?
How's this gonna affect me? Well, they could keep saying that, and then the virus evolves, and it's going to start affecting them. Yeah. So,
or if it just lingers out for 20, 30 years,
yeah.
Us, young and healthy, we're going to be eating our hats
long enough to kill us later.
Yeah, let's hope it doesn't stick around for that long.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Yeah, we don't want to get too much onto that, but they, some of the stuff they've been talking about is like, this thing will be around really until we achieve herd immunity. Because it's everywhere now. It's getting everywhere. They're not really talking about containing it. We're talking about flattening the curve, but that's just putting off kind of the inevitable. Right. We're just lowering the amount of cases right now so that the health professionals can take care of us. But eventually this thing will probably infect a lot of people. And until enough people have been infected and become immune, or if we can bide enough time to get the vaccine, we're going to be stuck with this thing until it burns out. And it might end up in wildlife populations so that it might come back every year or something like that.
Like a seasonal thing?
Yeah, but fortunately, the good thing is then the only hosts it's going to have at that point will be children, new children, and it's mild in children. In fact, that's one of the things I will talk about is that one of the epidemiologists was mentioning that a possibility here is that some of the last group of viruses in this family we haven't talked about are these super mild coronaviruses that are around that cause essentially the common cold.
So how long has the term coronavirus been
I think
around,
I saw that the first one was isolated in like the 70s.
What?
Yeah, and the name comes from, this is something we should definitely talk about. These viruses are kind of a strip of RNA, genetic material, packaged in a kind of a spherical, what we call a virion. A virion is the actual kind of vehicle for the virus itself. And it's not actually, that part of the virus is not its genetic material. The part with the genetic material is considered the virus. So the outside of it has these little proteins on the outside that look like little spikes, and it gives it this kind of halo, a fuzzy halo, and an electron micrograph. So the very first pictures of this would have been an electron micrograph, which are already fuzzy. Yeah. And then it had this fuzzy halo around it that looks like, it actually looked like a corona, the corona of the sun, which the name for that comes from the crown. Right. And so if you look at, we really need Anirban here because he'd be able to tell us exactly what the corona is of the sun. But if you were to look at during a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse, and the sun is blocked out by the moon, you'll still see this halo around it of all that stuff, the gases and stuff erupting from the sun. And it actually apparently was from that reference, not directly as a crown, because it looked just like the halo around the sun.
Yeah, I looked it up the other day because I was interested in the etymology too. And everything online now, if you look it up on Google, has to do with Saint Corona.
Saint Corona.
And I was talking with you guys about this before we started the show, but Saint Corona is a Catholic saint, and everyone's saying now that Saint Corona is
the patron saint of
pandemics.
Of pandemics,
which doesn't make a damn bit of sense. Saint Corona is the patron saint of treasure hunters, which is pretty cool.
We need to probably bring Saint Corona medals with us looking for dinosaurs next time we do it.
Yeah. I've been in Mexico enough that maybe I should start praying to Saint Corona.
So the last group of coronaviruses we'll talk about are these ones that are mild, but the idea that this epidemiologist, this is going to be far separated from when I brought this up, but the idea that it could spill back into wildlife populations and come back every year, but when it comes back, if it burns through all the human population this year through the next year, and we build up herd immunity, it's only going to have children, and coronaviruses seem in general to not affect children very much. So when it comes back from year to year to year, if it does, they'll just get the common cold from it. And they'll go,
so it'll be mild.
You got your COVID-19 this year. And they'll go,
get your
Daddy,
COVID-19
what was it
shot.
like? What was it like that year that the big COVID-19 epidemic happened? And why doesn't it get me that sick? Am I tougher than you? And I'll say, well, it was a crazy year, but we made it through it.
Well, while we're kind of on the topic of why we call
You're not gonna say that, so.
So the idea is that that's where all of the common cold coronaviruses may have came from. That maybe somewhere in human history there were previous SARS-like epidemics that just burned through everybody, right? And now they're still lingering as little bitty common cold viruses.
Huh.
Yeah, and that's where there's a handful.
So is that a good way for us to defeat this thing?
Well,
naturally through evolution?
It is the way, ultimately, whether it's through its vaccine or whether it's through herd immunity, it looks like, and there's a chance that this might not happen this way, but it's looking like that's exactly our only option.
Wow.
Okay.
That's it. And I should also mention to the listeners that the coronaviruses aren't the only viruses that cause the common cold. The more common ones and the more prevalent ones are the rhinoviruses.
Rhinovirus, right.
Those
are more typical common cold viruses. But coronaviruses.
And those viruses are shaped like little rhinoceroses.
That's right.
They got little horns on their on
and their
noses.
patron saint is Saint Hermergen.
So before we go to our next break, I've got one more kind of comment, something I've noticed that I'm really impressed with. People talk about the media being misinformed, and they do kind of put out the wrong information there, especially when it comes to science sometimes. But one thing I've been seeing that I'm really surprised by is we talked about how coronaviruses look. They're a sphere with this halo around them. But that's not the only shape that viruses have. Typically, when people think of viruses, they think of the bacteriophage, right? The kind of hexagonal
it looks
thing
like
with
a
little
spaceship
legs.
with legs. It looks like the lunar module.
Yeah,
Right.
when I think virus, that's
Little-
the first thing that pops into my mind. But you go to all these news agency websites, and you can tell. I don't know if it's just consequence, but they may be doing their research. But all the graphics they have actually have coronavirus.
Everybody's always going to remember what a coronavirus looks like after this.
Little sphere with spikes all over it.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we'll continue talking maybe about mild coronavirus after we
we'll
get
talk
back from
about
the
those
break. We'll have
guys.
a little bit of time on that, but we'll see you after the break. All right, we're back. We're the Science Knights, and we are talking about viruses, specifically the group of viruses called the coronaviruses. And where we left off, we kind of introduced the kind of third group. We talked about SARS and MERS, which were really kind of serious cases of coronavirus that were turned out not to be pandemics. Now we're going to talk about mild coronaviruses.
Yeah, so these are the ones I feel like we know the least about, and I'm a little ashamed because it was hard to find information on these milder coronaviruses, and I think that's just the way it works. We study viruses that are more lethal,
Like rhinovirus.
Yeah. Like the rhinovirus, I doubt that's very well studied either. Those there's probably some people that study them, but yeah, I mean virologists. There's probably I'd be interesting to find out what really gets virologists excited, but there are probably some that are probably nuts that really want to study the really deadly stuff, right? And then there are probably others that just want to. They who knows? But there's probably others that are interested in some of the other kinds that are very important from a public health perspective, but aren't quite as nasty, right? But then on the bottom, you would think the bottom of the scale are these ones that just cause the common cold. So here's a good example, though, where I think if we did have a lot more information on these other coronaviruses, it might help to kind of piece together the puzzle a little bit. It's a really interesting idea that these other coronaviruses that circulate through humans and just cause the common cold might have been sometime in history much nastier, like the ones that we're seeing now. And that this might be the destination for COVID-19, is to become a permanent common cold coronavirus that circulates every year in children. And the adult population, and if all the children get infected when they're young, then they're totally fine as adults. They're immune, so they're not going to experience it again. So it's a really interesting idea, but we don't really know. In fact, the names of these other coronaviruses, these common coronaviruses, are all like alphabet soups, H634. I mean, they're unpronounceable, just word or letter or number combinations that were just kind of assigned. Oh, we found another one. Here's another one. And that's probably all we know about them. It's just their name and that they're associated with the common cold.
Well, COVID-19, well, I looked it up today. Coronavirus, ID 2019.
Yeah.
So that's when it was discovered. So
Yeah.
I guess they all kind of have their own little story, right?
Yeah. And that's, the naming terminology, it used to be.
There's no standard, right?
Yeah, there isn't. It's kind of all over the place. And it used to be like a new virus would typically get at the name of the place it came from, and they've kind of gone away from that.
Right.
Because it gives these places a bad reputation.
Barcelona.
The classic example is actually right here in the USA. What they were calling the Four Corners virus, which was a hantavirus that emerged in like 1994, 95, killed a bunch of people, real nasty. Came from mice. And the cool thing about this story was that ecologists were studying mice in the Four Corners region for totally different reasons. And then all of a sudden, this was news everywhere. I definitely remember this because my family went to visit the Grand Canyon.
What year?
It was like 94. It was 94.
It was in the 90s.
Yeah. So my family went to...
We went to the Four Corners in the 90s. Yeah.
It could have been that year. You probably would have heard about it, though, because this was... the news was big. But the ecologists were there with all these mice that they were trapping for totally different reasons. And then the CDC was like, hey, can we check your mice? And they're like, sure, get a blood sample. And they're like, hey, this is the reservoir right here. And this is great because now we know everything about these populations of mice for the last 5 years because these people were already studying them. Super lucky. And they immediately tied the outbreak to a population surge of the mice. The mice were going through natural cycles of population, really high year because of rainfall the previous year. Boom, the mice were booming up, and then the virus spilled over. So anyway, they were calling that the Four Corners virus, and the Four Corners region was like, hell no, this is bad for tourism. Call it something else. And so the name is now Sin Nombre virus, which means
no name.
Without a name.
Without a name. Yeah. And, for some reason, every time I went up to the Four Corners, it reminded me that I'm a tetrapod. Because you'd
go to the actual Four Corners and put your legs
Sprawl
on either
out.
side. Okay.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I've actually never been there. I've been all throughout the Four Corners, but I've always felt like that was like a tourist trap, and I didn't want to go there.
Totally a tourist.
Yeah, I've never been up there. I'm a terrible geologist. I haven't been to that region of the U.S.
Have you been
man.
to the Grand Canyon?
I've never been to the Grand Canyon.
Oh.
Yeah.
Let's go right
I need
now.
to turn in my geologist card.
Yeah.
We got plenty of time.
Yeah,
You need to buy a burro.
We talk about the Grand Canyon on this show like every other show.
Right? I know.
Maybe we can do a remote
that's a great idea.
field trip from the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Now
that'd be great.
delivering our
We'll be
courses
wandering the
online.
wasteland anyway, so
Yeah, not going to catch COVID-19 out there for sure. I've actually been thinking about that, doing virtual field trips since.
Oh, that's great.
For the listeners out there, if you're not aware, just about every college and university in the U.S. is on lockdown right now, and professors are starting to deliver online classes starting next week.
Yeah.
Which is not easy for professors in the sciences. So it's going to be a fun week next week.
You're talking about virtual field trips. Like that was one of my goals, like to, come here in general, is to have a 3D, well, not 3D, a 360 camera, right? And go on hikes. Right?
Yeah.
And get people to
virtual hikes.
Yeah, well, and then you know what?
Yeah.
When people log in and go on there, they can either do it through virtual reality, which not a lot of people do have, but or they could just do it on their phone and like look wherever they want to look.
They want to go.
Yeah.
Hey, that would be, we're going to be doing all kinds of stuff like that now, because like imagine if you could have like a geology professor take you on a hike.
Sure.
Right?
I know.
How
And
many
talk
people
about
would be
formation.
listening to that like this week whenever everybody is just sitting around on Facebook like terrified of what the next week is going to bring, right? They'd be going on geology hikes with professors.
Well, I'm seriously considering these things because geology and biology, we rely a lot on field experiences, and with this COVID-19 stuff going on, I can't have my fun field trips because the national park is now not allowing any sort of group trips.
Big groups, no groups.
So
over
that's
10.
nixed, and half of my students are still in Houston and Dallas and wherever. So if I'm going to try to have a field component, a virtual field trip is one of the only options I have other than remote sensing. And I've got a field-based class. I've got an intro to field studies class.
wow.
I'm still trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm most bummed about is like I'm gonna just kind of put stuff online. I'm okay with that. I'm gonna record myself. It sucks for the students, but not taking on field trips is a bummer.
Yeah,
because we had a couple of good ones for April lined up, and they're all torpedoed now.
And that's all caused by this
coronavirus.
Yeah,
An emerging coronavirus, a brand new one.
We're actually seeing like some real effects from this, and
This one's
It's affecting everything.
This is
everything.
We're not gonna get out of this unscathed. Not at all. That's clear. I don't know how bad it's gonna be, but we're not getting out unscathed. This is a historical moment.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's gonna be as historical as 1918 influenza, but
polio.
Well, yeah.
Remember polio back in the
polio
40s, 30s?
It was with us for a long time, and it was finally eradicated. But yeah, this is going to be one that, I mean, it's kind of interesting. We've never really had anything super big in history as long as I've been alive. Nothing super historical like this has happened.
Well, we had the AIDS.
Yeah.
We had the polio. We had the
malaria. Since I've been alive, there's been diseases, right? But
Yeah.
this thing is like one of these big events, right? It's a big.
It's affecting everybody.
Yeah. It's like
Everyone.
world on the scale of like World War II, right? We haven't had anything like that. And this is ours, and I hope we're ready for it. I hope you guys are, because it's weird too. Because like when I was think about this, when you were all 18, 20. Kind of wanted something like this to happen. You ever feel that way?
You didn't have to go to high school.
Yeah, you want to run out in the woods and fight off the Ruskies. You wanted to be Red Dawn.
That's right.
That's the way I was when I was in my 20s, and when I was like 19. I always wanted that kind of like when this is a good example. The Y2K thing.
Oh yeah,
I was like,
Y2K.
man, crash it all. Let's do this. I just want to run off the woods. I didn't have a career. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I wanted to find a backpack, run out in the woods. Now I'm 42. I've got a career. I've got a family.
You've read The Road.
I've read The Road. I read The Stand.
Okay,
I've done all my research.
The Stand, yeah.
And
That's a good one, too.
I don't want it to happen, man. Now I'm not ready anymore. I'm a big pansy, and I can't take it. I don't want the civilization to collapse. You know what? It's not going to. Like we talked about in our Coronavirus 2 episode, it's a long spring break, people. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
And it is going to be okay, and as long as, if everybody just went to the store like normal, we wouldn't be in this panic right now.
That's the scariest thing is people buying up all the supplies and hoarding them.
Yeah, and that was the interview that I had on Thursday or on Wednesday, sorry. And yeah, I mean, it was just like, calm yourselves down. Let's just chill. Let's have a good time. Let's enjoy it.
And you know, we're fortunate to live here in Alpine.
Yeah.
I've heard from people who live in other places, bigger cities up in Midland, Odessa, Dallas, Houston, and it's chaos. I talked to a student a couple of days ago who's up in Midland, and she said there's not a single thing on the shelves in the grocery store, and people are shooting each other already. It's
Well, they're in
insane.
Austin. They're robbing people that are like leaving the stores, like with their bag of groceries and stuff.
Yeah.
They're getting robbed.
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna have to worry.
Reported on today.
I don't know if we're gonna have to worry about that in Alpine because I was over at True Value the other day stocking up on provisions, and I noticed that
Were those like 9mm standard provisions or
9mm standard provisions.
Oh, God.
And I'll just say that there weren't many boxes of 9mm standard provisions left. So, yeah,
Well,
don't try and rob anyone in Alpine.
Those blue paper towels.
And we also have a ton of
nice.
law enforcement here because
Yeah.
we
We
don't.
got
It's
great-
not
great
just
law
it's not
enforcement.
just the sheriff, right? We got everybody is here.
Yeah.
I don't think we have
everybody.
to worry about that.
Yeah.
And you know the reason why we have like I leave my door open all the time, and I leave my car door open all the time.
Yeah.
Well, there's no pawn shops around here.
Yeah, we're
Who's gonna hawk it? Right?
Yeah, I always feel like the most expensive thing on my truck is the window that they would have to smash if I locked my truck. So I leave it
Right.
open.
Yeah, just leave it open. Why not?
Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else you want to?
I think we covered it pretty well. Yeah. So coronaviruses are interesting. We need to study them more, and we need to. I think after this, nobody's going to. There's going to be funding for doing this kind of reconnaissance to find out what other viruses could be out there. And we've been doing it, but I now think that we're going to really kick it into high gear. Epidemiologists. I think that's going to be a growing field, kids. So, and it's a good field to have a lot of people in.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So read those books.
Read those books.
study.
Read The Hot Zone, The Stand, The Road.
Read The Road for sure.
Don't read it right now, though. Don't read it this week.
Yeah.
Wait till this blows over. If you haven't read it, and then read it. Don't read it this week.
Get an 800-page textbook on virology.
That's
and
more
study
like
up on it.
That's more like
go
it.
hoard some ammo.
One without pictures
Yeah.
of patients. One with,
All right. Well, this is the Science Nights. Be sure and follow us on Facebook, Science Nights in the Morning. And you can also get a link to all of our videos that we have on YouTube. You can also listen to us live on BigBenRadio.com. Yeah, BigBenRadio.com. So if you have friends, you like the show, tell them about the show, and they can stream us live.
Yeah, and if you haven't spent all your money on toilet paper, hop over to Patreon and contribute if you can.
Yeah, and you'll get cool things like
Yep.
bumper stickers. We got coffee mugs and
We need Science
flip
Nights.
flops.
We need Science Nights toilet paper.
toilet paper. Wow.
That's how we'll get people to subscribe.
That's a great idea.
It's gonna be way too expensive. All right.
All right, I'll catch y'all next week.